And it's great to be with you this afternoon. Today is November the 6th, 2019, and I'm Will Jones, here with my friend Mr. Boyd Maize. And we want to just ask you a few questions about your history in Germantown and your history especially at Germantown Presbyterian Church. We think you're one of our great treasures, and you have such a wonderful relationship with this church that goes back many, many years. So I wanted to start our time together by asking you if you could tell me one of your earliest memories of Germantown Presbyterian Church.
In the early 2000s, before 2005, not 2000s, what was that, 1900s?
The 1900s.
1900s. My family and I would drive on some Sundays east to a resort for lunch, and we would drive through Germantown. And sometimes my father took the West Street route and came around by the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so impressed by the church by the side of the road.
Hmm.
There was the building right beside the road. The area behind it was totally bare at that time.
Yes.
No trees or anything but grass in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what attracted my attention.
And so you remember the old church that we call Evans Chapel now.
Yes.
You remember it when it used to be oriented north-south before it was moved to its current location.
Yes.
And you came to church there as a boy.
And when we moved to Germantown, we moved our attendance to this church.
And do you remember what year that was?
It was, I was about 13 years old.
All right. And how old are you now?
I'm 96, 95. I'm 95.
95 years old.
I'll be 96 in just a few months.
And so you can remember Germantown long before its growth in the mid-20th century.
Oh, yes.
You remember it back in the olden days.
Yes. And at that time, the unofficial mayor of Germantown was Jack Berry, who lived at the corner of what is Cordes Road, what do they call it now? Anyway, just north of the railroad track.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a little service station there, and they had less than 300 people in the town.
In the whole town.
In the original town.
Wow. And where was your house when you were growing up?
On Hacks Crossroad.
Where it is now?
Approximately where it is now. The original house burned. And we built back the house that I live in now.
Wow.
When our children were expected.
So you and your wife built back the house that burned.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about your wife. Who was she?
My wife was a preacher's daughter. She was his youngest daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And her sister Flora and her next older sister Grace all were, of course, faithful members of the church, and they lived in the manse.
Mm-hmm.
And the church at that time had some revolving fans that sat on pedestals up on a wall on the side towards the church. And they ran during church to give some ventilation. And then as soon as church was over, they grabbed the fans and took them over to the manse and had them to cool the manse in their bedroom and downstairs.
No air conditioning in those days.
No air conditioning.
So when did you first meet your wife, Mary Nell? Martha Nell?
Well, it would have been at school, at Germantown School, and it would have been through my sister, Noreen. And they were very good friends and did things together. Among other things, I used to raise pigs, registered Duroc pigs, and my sister and Martha Nell were good friends, and at the Mid-South Fair, in whatever year this was, they went to the fair together. But I had been to the fair to show my pigs at the 4-H exhibit. And after the 4-H exhibit, I took a farm wagon and I just slept in the farm wagon out on the fairgrounds that week. And they were at the fair for the Mid-South Fair. And so I came up to visit them. And we had always been very good friends, and so we were friends. There's no thought of anything else. And we were going to the old mill, which, not the old mill, the rocking boat that was supposed to scare you to death, make you think you're going to fall into the water. And we were going through there, and we went through some very scary point, and the sound effects put out something which startled my wife, that should be, and Martha Nell grabbed my hand. And that was the end of it.
From that first touch.
That was the first time, and I remember it till right now.
I bet. That's a great story.
Anyway, then we went over to the old mill, and that's when the boats went through the tunnel and had things to scare you as when we were going through the tunnel. And we topped off the first exhibit with this exhibit, and she grabbed my hand again. And I always blamed her. I said, "You did that on purpose."
Okay, that's great. I see you're wearing a World War II veteran hat.
Yes.
Will you tell us a little bit about your service in the Second World War? You have a very distinguished military career.
In the service, I volunteered for service when I was 18 years old, and the war had started, and my mother and father had to sign permission at that time for me to enlist. And I blamed them with that ever after. But anyway, they signed for me, and I signed up for a program that was being promoted. I went to Southwestern College. I had a scholarship, and I went to Southwestern College, and they had a program that offered the potential that it might be something like what it turned out to be. And what that was, I was in a program to develop pilots for the Air Corps. And it was going to Southwestern, and there was a large group of boys there from Memphis, and I was there from Germantown, and we of course were friends and interested in the same program. And I signed up and they signed up, and they and I got notice to come to the service at day appointed, and we went to a railroad station down in Memphis, and when they got their tickets, gave their orders, which had included transportation, and they got their tickets, and then the ticket man said I had to pay 50 cents more. And I said, why? He said, because you live in Germantown, and they're going on a train for people living in Memphis. It's going on one railroad, and you're going on the Southern Railroad, which comes out this way, and your ticket doesn't cover from downtown to Germantown. I said, well, now what do we do? They said, you either pay 19 cents or you go home.
That's right.
So I paid 19 cents and was on my own by myself then to get into the Army and Air Force training down in Florida at that time. And that's why I ended up where I did, over 19 cents.
Over 19 cents. You got to go, and you started training for the Air Force.
That's right.
And you flew what type of bomber?
I flew a B25 bomber, and we went through training. First of all, we went through primary, and you just had to solo to plane to go to the next step. And when we got to the step where you chose whether you wanted single engine or twin engine, multi-engine, I said multi-engine. And that's what got me into the B-25s.
And tell us about the story when you were headed off to the war. You came and you flew over Germantown for a few minutes. Will you tell us about that?
We trained in the course of training. We formed a crew, an airplane crew, and we could have been assigned anywhere in the world. We didn't have any control over that. And at the time, the war was very hot in Europe, and we expected that we would be sent to Europe. And we were over in Savannah, Georgia, and they called us, our crew, and said, here, and they gave us the keys to an airplane. They say, you take this airplane and deliver it to Honolulu,
Oh, wow.
Any way you can. We were on our own. We had never done that. But we made out our plans. And when we made out our plans, the pilot and I, he was from over near Jackson, Tennessee, and I was from here. And we said, well, we may as well make a plan to include our homes. And so and nobody knew we were flying. Nobody knew where we were or what we were doing. We were on our own. And we went to New Bern, Tennessee was his home. And we buzzed the town square. And he flew because he knew the territory. And I waved at the ladies in the courthouse eye to eye.
Oh, my goodness.
And then we came back on the other side of the courthouse and did the same thing. And then we came down. Part of the deal was that we would come down here. And we came down here, and when we got here, it was, we had to stay low because they could see us from the airport at Municipal Airport, and we weren't supposed to be here. We hadn't filed a flight plan with anybody, and so I flew by the manse and Mrs. Brooks' house across the street, and I knew where the trees were. I knew where the drop in the land was behind there where the cotton gin was, and the other pilot waved to Martha Nell, who was out here, and then we headed on to Dyersburg. Dyersburg had been a training point for B-17s, and they had just shipped their last class of B-17s out as replacements, and they were without any airplanes for the crews that were up there. And we flew in, and they just had a fit because no one up there had ever even seen a B-25.
Oh, my goodness. And did you get in trouble for flying low over Germantown or New Bern? Nobody got in trouble.
Nobody got in trouble.
I'm glad you did that. That's a great story. And Martha Nell knew that you were headed off to the war.
That's right.
How many years were you gone?
When we got married, though, that had an impact. My parents and Martha Nell stayed at the hotel in Jackson, in Dyersburg, when they went up there. In fact, it was in Jackson, Dyersburg. And so she remembers the night as special. I was out at the airplane, sleeping on the airplane, and we took off very early the next morning, so I didn't see her again. I just wrote her. But we had caused trouble to start.
I can only imagine. And how many years were you off in the service in the war?
I came home, the war ended August 7 or 5. August 5 of 1945. And I came home. When that happened, the Army did something that was remarkable. They were prepared for it. And so all of the war equipment, they immediately destroyed.
Mm.
Just they dumped it down in the ocean, and including airplanes.
Mm-hmm.
But my crew got one of the airplanes to keep, and when the Japanese surrender crew, following the directions at the end of the war, that they wanted to have a signed contract of surrender. They were coming to our island, and my crew had to leave that day to take the plane so that there'd be space for the Japanese, but the other gunners on my crew were there and saw the Japanese plane come in and disembark and hand over the written surrender. And when the moment that changed hands, the war was officially over.
Wow. Do you remember how many missions you flew?
I don't remember right now.
And do you have a memory of any particular mission that stands out for you?
Well, one mission that is timely is Hong Kong. We flew at the end of the war. It was near the end of the war. It wasn't yet over. And Hong Kong had been a very hot spot. You know, Hong Kong was one of the first cities that was bombed on the 7th of December. And so they sent our crew and another crew up there. We were told that they had withdrawn from Hong Kong. The only way we could find out for sure would be to go there. So we went up there and we went down right on the water, and there were some ships, Chinese junks in the harbor, and we went right by each one and we checked out the passengers on that. And there were none that appeared to be foreign. They were Chinese. And they were we were satisfied when we went on up the river to a city, I can't call it the name, it's a very well-known city, which was very much like Memphis. And we checked that city. What is this city? But anyway, we checked that city, and it looked to us like it was clear, but our orders were that we were to strafe the city.
Oh, wow.
And that was the most heartrending and stressful thing I ever did, was to go in randomly shooting guns, and I knew we had to be killing civilians who were innocent people. But we had our orders. We had to get back. We had to unload. We didn't have the gas to get back otherwise. And so we did that. And I wrote a letter to Martha Nell about that. Was one bombing that I was very, very unhappy about.
You've told me that before, about how some of the stress that came out of some of your
when you're
time.
bombing, you're going to hurt innocent people.
Mm-hmm.
And most people don't like to do that.
No.
But my most interesting experience was that when we were near the end of the war, and we weren't that near then, but anyway, the commander of our organization squadron called me into his office and asked me if I would agree to go on a United States submarine.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know why. I didn't know what a submarine was. I didn't know how they operated. I knew nothing. But he said he had received this request from the Admiral of the Navy, which puts a little bit of pressure on you, and wanted to furnish a pilot to go on a submarine on a certain date, and that date was tomorrow. And would I do it? And my pilot he asked him first, and he agreed to it, and then he thought about it, and he changed his mind. He said no, he would not do it, and you had to be a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was forced to be a volunteer.
Of course.
But we went on it, met the submarine, and met the admiral out on the submarine when we got away. And my best story about that is the head.
Mm-hmm.
The head of submarine. Do you know about the head?
I know. I can only imagine what a head
Well,
on a...
here's somebody who's never, ever heard Navy talk.
Okay.
And the skipper was very cordial to me. He was very nice to me. And we had this meeting with the admiral, and we had to be there at the time he said. We weren't going to be a minute late, I guarantee you. And he said he knew I wanted to see the head, but he'd have to wait. And he said something else about the head, and I was thinking to myself, I don't know anything about the head, but I got to go to the bathroom.
Okay.
And everything worked out.
I'm so glad.
Eventually.
That's right. And you...
When the admiral left, and we went down in the submarine, I figured we were going to turn to the left to the back of the submarine, and he said the head. I figured we're going to turn right to where the front of the submarine is. I didn't know that what the head is, and he turned left and went back. I didn't think I was going to hold that. So we got there. He said, "There it is."
I bet. That's funny. So after the war, you came back and you married Martha Nell, and you settled in Germantown, and you had 2 daughters. Can you tell us a little bit about the church and what you remember from the 1950s or 60s?
Pertinent to Mr. Warren, to your question. When I first saw the church, when I first came to the church. Mr. Warren had a church responsibility, but he had other churches that he was responsible for in this area. So he would preach the sermon at our church every Sunday morning. But every so often, even every other Sunday or something like that, that night he would go to a church in Memphis, which was on his round table, and he would preach the sermon there, and we, the congregation, would come to church and party. And quite frankly, we look forward to it.
He was out preaching, and you would come to the church and have fun.
But when they first came to Germantown, they got here and it didn't have any place to unload their, if I already told you that, they had no place to unload their belongings. The manse was occupied by somebody else.
Oh.
Non-Presbyterian. The Presbyterians weren't using it, and they were renting it out to somebody else, whoever was running things for the Presbyterian church.
Yes.
And that created some confusion. They found that the Baptist church, they had an empty building down there. The Baptist church didn't have a church either then. And they went down there and spent the night. And so the Warrens had a place to stay.
If you had any message that you would want to say to a younger church member today, from your perspective of wisdom and experience, what would you want to say to a young Christian, a young church member today?
You have a history. You have a record. They are each something you should be proud of. Keep it up. Keep it up. Whatever it takes.
And you're talking about the church itself.
The church itself.
That's right.
However you feel it should be done, that's your problem. That's your responsibility. But keep it going. Keep the message. What did I say to you the first night you came here and preached the funeral? You said, pick a song. And what did I say?
Your favorite hymn?
That's right. Your favorite hymn. Just be sure that your favorite hymn is justified.
Yes.
But it's your favorite hymn, not mine.
Do you have your own favorite hymn? Do you have one you particularly love?
No, I don't. I sang in the choir for many, many years. I've done a lot of singing. I love to sing.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus loves the little children, all the children of the world.
Mm.
Red and yellow, black and white, all are equal in his sight. Jesus loves the little children of the world. That's my message.
I think that's a great message, and that's one of your favorite hymns is very appropriate. Let's finish up with one more question. Can you think of a time when the church was especially helpful to you, any time of hardship or a time of heartache for you when your church members came through for you?
If I tell you all the good, we don't have time. So I want to tell you about a heartache. When we had moved the church over there, and we were holding church over there, and we were holding Sunday school over there. And we were doing everything over there. Mr. Warren was a person of love. He loved everybody, not Presbyterians. He was loved in return by the community, by the white people, by the black people, by the tramp on the street, for the grass cutter, for the bum, that they all loved Mr. Warren.
Mm-hmm.
When he gave us word that he was leaving, going to move away, it was natural that there would be some evidence of appreciation for him. And we had a request, another thing, this was a time when the questions of black and white had become consequential. I remember them raising the question of what will we do if some black person comes to the church and wants to come in. And my answer was, treat them just like you do treat every white person.
Mm-hmm.
Because we weren't taking in new members. They just, we weren't of that mind.
Yes.
And a black man came to the church body and said that the people from the churches down here on Johnny Lane wanted to have a little program of appreciation for Mr. Warren.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that was significant. It told a whole lot about things, but it told about him. And the session said, okay, and they put him in a very corner in the basement where he could barely be seen. to make his statement of appreciation. And I was so disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
I was disappointed in us. I was disappointed in me. That was an act of love. Love not for me, not for somebody in our church. It was love for Mr. Warren.
Mm-hmm.
And his service, just handing out little gifts to people who needed them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you sharing that story, because it's not easy to talk about some of those times of heartache and pain. But I appreciate your sharing that. And I know that he had a great influence on you as your father-in-law.
Oh, he did.
And a lot of love for a whole generation of people here at GPC.
Mrs. Warren did too.
And so did she. Well, thank you very much for your time. That was a wonderful interview, and we're grateful for you as one of our silver saints. And you mean a lot to so many people here at GPC. And every Sunday you're so faithful, and you come to worship every Sunday at 8:30, and you stay all the way through both services until noon. And we just appreciate you, and we love you, and thank you very much.
I do it because I want to.